In this video, we look at great American towns you've probably never heard of. Most of the towns we're talking about don't show up on relocation lists, travel rankings, or top places to live videos. Not because they're bad, because they don't play the game. They don't have a marketing budget, they don't chase tech startups, and they don't really care if you know their name or not. Today we go in depth on some great American towns. Not influencer towns, not retirement hype zones, not places everyone dreams about escaping to. These are real towns that work for the people who actually live there. Let's take a look. Geneva, New York. Geneva, New York sits where land exhales into water. At the north end of Seneca Lake, the town doesn't announce itself so much as it waits to be noticed. It has learned the value of patience. Water teaches you that. Before streets and storefronts, this place belonged to the Seneca people. The lake wasn't just scenery. It was movement, sustenance, shelter, and time measured in seasons rather than years. When the Revolutionary War reached the Finger Lakes, it didn't arrive gently. Villages were erased, fields were burned, order was broken. Geneva's earliest chapter is not one of founding, but of absence. What followed was rebuilding layered on loss. Settlers came after the war and discovered that it was a natural crossroad. The lake moved goods, roads converged, Geneva became useful before it became ambitious. That practically shaped its bones. In 1815, when the American and British representatives gathered here to talk peace after the War of 1812, it felt appropriate. Geneva had already learned how to host difficult conversations. Through the 19th century, ideas passed through the town as steadily as freight. Abolition, education reform, women's rights. Nearby voices like Elizabeth Cady Stanton echoed through churches and lecture halls. Geneva never shouted its beliefs, but it held them firmly. That quiet stubbornness still hums under the surface today. Industry arrived without spectacle and stayed just long enough to leave calloused hands and brick buildings. Factory and agricultural research brought stability, not wealth. Geneva never boomed, it accumulated years. When industry receded in the late 20th century, the town folded inward rather than falling apart. Some places panic when the work leaves. Geneva just adjusted its posture and carried on. Nature here refuses to stay in the background. The lake is deep enough to change weather and wide enough to alter moods. Storms announce themselves miles away. Sunsets slow traffic, and the hills surrounding the town hold vineyards now. Neat rows etched into slopes that once carried orchards and dairy cows. The land never stopped working. It just learned a new rhythm. There are places in the United States known for great wine. Napa, California, Willamette Valley here in Oregon, and the Finger Lakes region of New York, to name a few. Modern Geneva lives somewhere between memory and motion. Hobart and William Smith keep the town intellectually restless. Students arrive with urgency and leave with nostalgia they didn't expect. Locals move at a steadier pace, measuring time by who stayed, who left, and who came back. Downtown has softened, not disappeared. Restaurants changed hands, storefronts tried again, and lakefront is more present now, but still honest. No walls of luxury, no illusion of escape, just benches, paths, and water stretching south. Life in Geneva is built on reputation. Morning walks by the lake, long winters that test resolve, summers that linger just long enough to feel earned. It is not cheap in desperation and not expensive in performance. It exists in the middle, somewhere you can live without explaining yourself. Geneva does not promise reinvention. It offers continuity. It remembers its past without romanticizing it. It accepts changes without surrendering its shape. In a country addicted to transformation, Geneva survives by staying recognizably itself. Granville, Ohio. Granville sits in eastern Licking County, just far enough away from Columbus to feel separated from it. You can get to downtown in under an hour, but when you come back, the pace drops almost immediately. The land changes first, the flat central Ohio landscape starts to roll, roads bend instead of running straight, and the town appears more deliberately placed than accidentally grown. The village traces its roots back to the early 1800s, when settlers from New England arrived with strong ideas about order, education, and permanence. They laid out the streets carefully, built homes meant to last, and centered the town around churches, schools, and shared spaces. That influence never faded. Granville still looks and feels more like a small New England village than a typical Midwestern town, and it's not pretending to be anything else. One of the most important forces shaping Granville has been Denison University. Founded in 1831, the school sits on a hill above the town, visible but not overpowering. Its presence brought ideas, culture, and stability without turning the village into a party town or a place that empties out every summer. Students come and go, but the town keeps its rhythm. Faculty families settle in, events spill into the community, and the relationship feels mutual rather than dependent. Nature plays a quiet but constant role in daily life here. Granville isn't surrounded by dramatic wilderness, but the landscape has texture. Wooded ravines, walking trails, and old trees break up neighborhoods. Autumn is especially noticeable, with the colors spreading across the hills instead of flashing briefly and disappearing like you'd get in New England. Winter slows things down, spring comes gradually, and summers never seem to last long enough. Downtown Granville remains compact. Broadway is lined with the local businesses that serve residents first and visitors second. There's little interest in chasing trends or overdeveloping space. Stores tend to stay open for years, not months. Restaurants don't try and reinvent themselves every season. The result is a downtown that feels used rather than staged. Housing reflects the same mindset. Older homes dominate, many with front porches and mature trees. New construction happens, but it usually blends instead of standing out. This town resists rapid expansion, and that restraint shapes everything from traffic to schools to daily interactions. Modern life in Granville isn't big city or small town. It's that comfortable in between. People recognize each other. High school sports still matter. Community meetings are attended. Disagreements happen, but they're usually handled face to face. There's a sense that people expect to live alongside one another for a very long time, so burning bridges isn't productive. Granville isn't the next big thing. It's not a place people talk about as a hot spot or the greatest place to retire or raise a family. It's somewhere in the middle, on the positive side of middle. History hasn't been polished into a selling point, and progress hasn't erased what came before. The town works because it knows its scale and sticks to it. For visitors, Granville may feel understated at first, but the longer you're there, the more its logic makes sense. It's a place designed to be lived in, not passed through, and that intention shows up in small, ordinary ways that add up over time. Brevard, North Carolina. You don't arrive in Brevard and immediately think to yourself you've found something special. That comes later, if it comes at all. At first, it just feels functional. Streets that are useful instead of eye-catching, buildings that look used instead of curated, a downtown that exists because people need a downtown, not because it was part of some developer's fever dream. This town sits in Transylvania County, North Carolina, where geography has always had the final say. And no, has nothing to do with vampires. I know that went through a lot of people's minds when you hear the word Transylvania. Instantly, you think about Dracula. That Transylvania is in Romania. This is a mountain town in northwest North Carolina, where the mountains remind you that expansion costs more here, takes longer, and rarely goes the way the plan suggested. People who move expecting easy mountain living usually recalibrate within a year. Some stay, some leave. Both groups swear they understood what they were getting into. Brevard formed the way many Appalachian towns did, not from vision boards or optimism, but from practicality. This was a rough place to live back in the day. Farming was difficult, logging was dangerous, mining paid just enough to keep people rooted. Nothing here was ever easy enough to inflate expectations, which may be why disappointment never became part of the town's identity. The economy here followed a familiar pattern. Timber first, then industry, then adaptation. Mills opened, mills closed, without ceremony. Families learned not to anchor their future on a single employer. That mindset still shows. Brevard doesn't panic when things change. It adjusts and waits. Brevard College opened here in 1933. It's not a big college, but it is in downtown Brevard. It's just big enough to add some flavor to the town, but not enough to overtake it. The land surrounding Brevard isn't just scenery, it's constraint. The Pisgah National Forest presses up against the town limits and enforces boundaries no planning commission could. Water is everywhere. Waterfalls are common enough that locals stop mentioning them. Visitors don't. The difference alone explains most comment sections. Living next to that much forest changes daily behavior. You plan around weather, you accept that services won't always be immediate, Cell coverage disappears exactly when you need it. People who describe this place as peaceful usually haven't tried scheduling a contractor here. Brevard's proximity to Asheville shapes who ends up staying. It's close enough to visit, far enough to discourage people who need constant stimulation. Those who move here expecting Asheville without the crowds tend to be the most vocal when reality sets in. Those who wanted the distance rarely complain at all. Downtown is beautiful and cozy at the same time. The courthouse still anchors the town, both physically and culturally. That alone puts Brevard in a shrinking category of American towns. Modern Brevard lives with pressure. Retirees arrive with a plan, remote workers arrive with expectations about internet speeds and convenience. Tourism brings in money and inconvenience in equal measure. Housing prices have climbed. Short-term rentals, complicated neighborhoods. Everyone agrees on the facts. No one agrees on the cause. Brevard also has a pretty good music scene, and it's part of the town's personality. It lags behind Asheville when it comes to being known for music. They do have the Brevard Music Center, which is excellent. And it's not a rebranding thing. Brevard didn't try and reinvent themselves as this music capital. It's Appalachia. They're just known for their music. It goes all the way back to the folk music there. Daily life as a local is kind of a mixed bag. People know which trails to avoid on weekends. They know which grocery store line moves faster. They know when to leave town before leaf season turns errands into negotiations. That knowledge doesn't come from guides or videos like this. It comes from staying long enough to stop romanticizing about the place. And that's kind of hard to do. Even though it's a beautiful town, the town doesn't win people over with spectacle. It wins by staying consistent while expectations adjust around it. Over time, small details start to matter more than big ideas. Weather patterns, quiet hours, the way conversations end without a conclusion. Some people call it boring, others call it sustainable. Burlington, Iowa. When the Mississippi River reaches Burlington, it doesn't make a scene with waterfalls or rapids. It spreads out, eases up, and hangs around like it's not in a hurry. That's always been the deal here. The river slows things down and the town follows that lead. The Mississippi was doing business here long before Burlington existed. Native tribes used this stretch as a travel route, a food source, and a meeting place. It wasn't a landmark, it was the system. When settlers showed up in the early 1800s, they didn't pick Burlington so much as they ran into it. The bluffs squeezed the river just enough that boats had to slow down. And whenever boats slow down, people stop. And when people stop often enough, they build things. By the 1830s, Burlington had organized itself into something official. For a brief moment that most Americans forgot, this town mattered a bunch. Iowa's first territorial capital was here. Big decisions about land and law were made within earshots of the Mississippi River here. Burlington wasn't some outpost. It was part of the argument over what the country was becoming. That spotlight didn't last. Capitals move. The country grew outward. Burlington stayed put. Railroads cut through the bluffs. Factories showed up. Lumber yards, machine shops, manufacturers. The town stacked itself vertically instead of spreading out. River below. Tracks in the middle, neighborhoods climbing the hills like they've got something to prove. The landscape never made it easy. Floods came on the regular, and Burlington learned not to get too dramatic about it. You rebuild, you move on, the bluffs limit where you can go, so you work with what you have. Streets bend and tilt because the land says so. Snake Alley exists for one simple reason. People need to get up the hill, and complaining about it wasn't going to flatten it out. Snake Alley is very similar to Lombard Street in San Francisco. Does that back and forth switchback thing. And when you have a unique road like that, you gotta make it look good with some inventive landscaping, which theirs is pretty good. Lombard Street is insanely good, but this is pretty decent too. But by the mid-20th century, Burlington had settled into a steady routine. Factories employed the same families for decades, neighborhoods developed personalities, and locals remember where all their old favorite stores used to be. Then the highway showed up and skipped right past the town. Burlington wasn't abandoned, it was no longer on the way to somewhere else. That changes a place. Downtown thinned out but never vanished. Some buildings sat empty, others adapted. The courthouse stayed put, the riverfront improved slowly, one project at a time, without trying to turn itself into something that it was never meant to be. Today, Burlington lives somewhere between remembering and accepting. People talk about when things were busier, but they don't pretend the old days were perfect. Manufacturing still exists, but it shares the load now with healthcare, education, logistics, and small businesses. Life continues without a sales pitch. Trains roll through loud enough to pause conversations, and it really doesn't affect the locals. I've been through here on a train. Actually took an Amtrak, went straight through Burlington a couple times now. It's a pretty cool little town. They have a nice little water park called Huck's Harbor, which is nice when the weather cooperates. Weather complaints here are sincere. Winters are sharp, summers are thick. Both are dealt with the same way they always have been. Being in Iowa's southeastern edge gives Burlington a slightly detached personality. It feels more river town than prairie town. Closer in spirit to St. Louis than Des Moines, that distance keeps expectations more realistic. Nature here isn't polished. The river can be calm or threatening. Parks look used, trails feel honest, trees grow where they manage to survive. The bluffs don't care about plans or branding. People who stay in Burlington mean to. People who leave sometimes circle back with a different mindset. Burlington doesn't offer reinvention, it offers familiarity. In the evenings when the sun slips behind the hills and the Mississippi turns steel gray, the town feels settled. Not romantic, not broken, just here, still doing what it's always done. Priest River, Idaho. Priest River sits where two rivers shake hands and decide to keep each other company for a while. The Priest River slides down from the north until it meets the wider Pend d'Oreille. The meeting isn't dramatic, no cliffs, no roar, just water agreeing on a direction. That's the tone Priest River sets. Things happen quietly, then they last. Long before the town had its name, this stretch of northern Idaho belonged to the Cowsville people. For about 6,000 years, they moved with the seasons, fishing these waters and traveled the valleys long before anyone thought to argue over borders. When European trappers arrived in the early 1800s, they misunderstood almost everything, including the river's name. Priest likely came from a garbled reference to a Cowsville leader or a passing missionary. Like a lot of names out west, the name stuck even though it wasn't terribly accurate. Fur traders passed through, then moved on. What stayed was timber. By the late 1800s, Priest River found its purpose in the trees. Northern Idaho was thick with white pine, cedar, and fir. And the rivers were perfect for moving logs before the roads were anything more optimistic than an idea scratched in the dirt. Logging camps sprang up in the hills, rough and temporary, filled with men who measured time in daylight and muscle soreness. The town of Priest River grew around that industry. Then the train tracks showed up. The railroad didn't roll in gently. It showed up like a decision that had already been made for everyone. Once the tracks hit Priest River, the town stopped being a place logs passed through and started being a place they stopped. Timber no longer drifted patiently downstream. It got loaded, scheduled, and shipped east with purpose. That's when the town got its footing. Mills popped up and jobs were created. Houses stacked themselves nearby, close enough that work was never far from sleep. Saloons filled the gaps, doing exactly what they're built to do once the whistle blew. Days were measured in shifts, not hours. Years were marked by seasons and pay cycles, not anniversaries. This town was built on motion and noise, on saw blades chewing through forests and men cashing checks that smelled like pine. Then came the fires. Northern Idaho learned that forests don't forgive arrogance. The Great Fire of 1910 didn't destroy Priest River outright, but it scorched the region's confidence. Now, they were for the most part spared, but entire towns vanished in northern Idaho. Smokes reached across the states, and after that, logging changed. Safety mattered more, planning mattered a little, and the forest stopped being infinite and became something you respected. The town endured the usual Western cycles: boom, bust, reinvention. When timber slowed, people left. When it picked up again, they came back. Priest River learned how to live with fluctuations. That's one of those skills that never shows up in a brochure or a real estate website about a town. But it is written into the way people talk in places like Priest River. Nobody promises too much, nobody panics fast. Geographically, Priest River feels tucked in without being trapped. It's in Bonner County, north of Spokane and west of Montana, part of a region that feels closer to Canada in temperament than Boise in attitude. Water defines daily life. The Pend d'Oreille is broad and slow, a working river that reflects the sky. In summer, boats idle near shoreline, fishing lines arc into the current. In winter, the fog settles low and heavy, turning the confluence into something that feels borrowed from another decade. Sound travels differently then. The town shrinks into itself. Nature here isn't curated. Trails aren't always marked. Views aren't always framed. You find things by wandering or by being told where not to go. Forests around Priest River don't perform for visitors. They exist. Moose move through quietly. Eagles perch where they please. Deer treat backyard fences like suggestions. It's a place where wildlife isn't a novelty, and the familiarity breeds respect instead of indifference. Priest River is small, just over 2,000 people, depending on the year and who's counting. Main Street is short enough where you could walk its length without breaking a sweat. There's a grocery store, a few places to eat, bars that remember your order after 2 visits, and hardware stores that sell things you didn't know you needed until you needed it badly. Life here runs on errands and favors more than schedules. Now the economy here is, it's kind of mixed. It's survived and adapted over the years. Logging still matters, though it no longer dominates. Construction, trades, small manufacturing, and remote work fill the gaps. A surprise number of residents work online, choosing Priest River not because it's convenient, but because it's grounding. Internet arrives faster than people expected. Patience arrives faster than that. Housing tells a familiar story with a local accent. Prices climbed after 2020, as they did almost anywhere where they still had trees and quiet. Some longtime residents were priced out, some newcomers arrived with expectations that didn't survive their first winter. Priest River doesn't bend to convenience easily. Snow comes when it wants, roads close, power goes out, the town shrugs and carries on. Community life remains stubbornly analog. The Timber Days Festival isn't ironic. It's memories with funnel cakes. Parades move at walking speed, high school sports draw crowds that look unrelated until you realize that half of them share the last name as people on the field. Churches play a visible role, not loudly, but steadily. Volunteerism isn't a virtue here, it's sort of a requirement. This town attracts a certain type of person now. Not the ones chasing trends, but those who want fewer decisions in a day. Retirees looking for quiet, families willing to trade amenities, and people that just want to put some distance between them and big cities. Statistically, Priest River is a pretty good place to live. Its biggest knock is it doesn't have a bunch of amenities. You won't find 10 different fast food chain restaurants. You'll get the standard handful of hardware stores, maybe a couple auto parts stores, and a schoolhouse that sits back from the road and has a nice lawn out front. You don't get that in cities. They're usually built right up to the sidewalk and the street. Priest River is a great place if you want to slow things down, see seasons change, and breathe in more oxygen than smog. Elko, Nevada. Elko sits where patience becomes a way of life and distance is not a concept but a daily brainworm. Brainworm? Nailed it. This isn't a place teenagers dream about moving to after high school. It's just not that type of place. This is a nice small town in the desert of Nevada where retirees move to when they want to save a buck and stay warm. For most Americans, when they think of great small towns, we normally think of New England small towns with old brick buildings and cute cobblestone streets, maybe even southern small towns with antebellum architecture and Spanish moss. But western desert small towns have their own beauty, even when they're not trying to push the Old West cowboy theme. If you look at a map of Elko, you realize it's lonely. Northeastern Nevada stretches wide and sparse, and it's quilted with sagebrush basins and long mountain shadows. That's where you'll find Elko, far away from everything big. Salt Lake City lies hundreds of miles to the east, Reno is far to the west, Boise feels like a rumor to the north. Elko is not a suburb, not a spillover, not a satellite. It stands on its own, the way older towns were forced to do before convenience softened geography. That isolation is the first thing people notice and often the last thing they understand. Long before Elko had a name, the land already did. The Western Shoshone lived here for generations, navigating the valleys and mountains with an understanding built from reputation, memory, and necessity. Elko's modern story begins as so many Western towns do, with the railroad. In 1868, the Central Pacific Railroad carved its way across northern Nevada, and Elko emerged as a service point. Trains need water, coal, repairs, and workers. Workers need food, shelter, and distractions. Temporary structures hardened into permanent ones. What began as a stop became a town because stopping made sense. From the beginning, Elko was practical. It didn't bloom. It assembled itself in the middle of the desert. Mining quickly followed, first silver, then gold, then a steady rhythm of booms and contractions that shaped the town's personality. Elko's never really learned to fully trust prosperity because it's seen so many cycles that end abruptly. Wealth arrives loudly and left quietly. People who stayed learned to pace themselves, to save when things were good, and to expect lean years that always seemed to show up. Ranching added another layer. Surrounding valleys supported cattle, and Elko became a supply hub for people who lived far beyond the reach of paved roads. Ranchers came into town for parts, groceries, paperwork, and conversations. Elko became a meeting place for people who spent most of their lives alone or in small clusters. That role still defines it today. Then there's the culture that surprises outsiders the most. Elko is one of the most cowboy places left in the country, and not in a themed or nostalgic way. The National Cowboy Poetry Gathering started here in 1980, not as a marketing idea, but as a recognition of a living tradition. Ranchers, poets, musicians, storytellers gather every winter to share work that is grounded in labor, land, and loss. It's not sentimental, it is honest, sometimes painfully so. The land around Elko is not gentle, but it is generous if you understand it. To the south rises the Ruby Mountains. Snow lingers on their peaks until late spring. Lamoille Canyon cuts deep into the range, offering alpine lakes, sharp ridge lines, and sudden quiet. In the winter, you have storms that roll in fast. In the summer, mornings are cool, afternoons are bright, evenings calm enough to hear your own thoughts. The high desert surrounding Elko stretches outward in long, open lines. Sagebrush dominates, but look closer and the variety reveals itself. Antelope move in small herds, hawks trace slow circles overhead. At night, the sky opens up completely. Stars appear not as decoration, but as architecture. A ceiling so high it almost feels fictional. Modern Elko is a blend of old rhythms and new pressures. Gold mining still anchors the economy with large operations nearby. When gold prices rise, the town hums. Restaurants fill, trucks roll in steady lines. When prices dip, Elko tightens its belt without ceremony. There's no illusion of permanence in boom times and no melodrama in downturns. Housing has become more complicated in recent years. Mining wages drive prices upward, creating tension for service workers and longtime residents. Elko's not immune to the forces reshaping small towns across the West. Growth arrives unevenly. Infrastructure strains quietly. Locals debate what kind of town they want to be without always agreeing on the answer. Daily life in Elko moves at a pace set by distance and weather. Commutes are short, but drives to anywhere else are long. People plan trips carefully, snowstorms taken seriously, stores close early, not because of trend, because tomorrow comes early too. There's a strong sense of routine here. Coffee shops fill with the same faces every morning. Bars host conversations that resume exactly where they left off days earlier. High school sports matter. Community events draw crowds because there are fewer distractions pulling people away. Elko's the kind of place you come to stay if that's your type of town. Those who do stay tend to do it with intention. Some come for work and discover they like the space. Some arrive restless and find that the land absorbs their noise. Others leave and later return, realizing that distance clarified what mattered. You know, Elko isn't easy to describe. It doesn't simplify well. Elko is quiet without being empty. Traditional without being a time capsule. Stand on a hill outside a town at dusk and you could see the whole place at once. The grid of streets, the low buildings, the distant mountains catching the last light. It feels small and vast at the same time. The railroad passes through, mining ebbed and surged. Generations came and went. The mountains stayed, the desert waited. Elko adapted, adjusted, and kept moving forward without your attention or your sympathy. Elko makes sense in a way that sneaks up on most people. And once it does, it's hard to forget or leave. Bayfield, Wisconsin. A small town with a long memory, sitting on the edge of Lake Superior where the water shapes the lifestyle, the economy, and the quality of life. Bayfield, Wisconsin feels like a town made for families who love cold weather and summers by the lake. This is a small town having under 800 residents. It sits on Lake Superior, not too far from Duluth, Minnesota, in the northernmost section of Wisconsin. Its origin story is similar to most Great Lake towns, with water doing the heavy lifting long before people showed up with plans, paperwork, and optimism. Because this stretch of shoreline was already a hub for movement, fishing, seasonal camps, and trade for the Ojibwe people long before anyone thought to call a real estate agent. life followed the lake. The Ojibwe people were known as the masters of the Great Lakes for centuries. When European traders arrived in the 18th and early 19th centuries, Bayfield wasn't a destination so much as it was a solution and a shelter harbor. Furs could be gathered, goods exchanged, and boats could rest without being punished by superiors' moods. Commerce followed the shoreline. The American push west eventually found Bayfield, and in the mid-1800s it became something more official, more permanent, and more confident than it probably should have been, because timber was king and Lake Superior made shipping logs easier than hauling them over land through mud and mosquitoes. The town got busy fast. Sawmills sprung up out of nowhere, along with boarding houses, saloons, and ambition. Logging didn't just shape the economy, it shaped the town's personality, attracting workers who expected hard labor, quick money, and little comfort, who understood that towns like Bayfield existed to be useful first and pretty later, if at all. Utility ruled everything. By the late 1800s, Bayfield was the county seat and one of the most important ports on Lake Superior's south shore, shipping timber, fish, and supplies while believing, briefly, that it might grow into something much larger. That moment passed. As the forests thinned and the logging moved on, Bayfield faced the same question that countless American towns have faced quietly and without ceremony. What happens when the reason you exist starts to disappear? The answer took some time. Fishing picked up some of the slack, especially commercial fishing for whitefish and herring, and the lake continued to provide work, though not the kind that built grand features or rapid expansion. Steady, the early 20th century brought change in smaller doses with fewer dramatic swings and more gradual adjustments, as Bayfield learned how to live without expecting to dominate the region or dictate its own importance. It settled into itself. The Apostle Islands, scattered just offshore, shifted from being an obstacle for navigation and hazards for ships to assets, slowly reframed as a place worth protecting, visiting, and eventually admiring rather than exploiting. Perspective changed about the Apostle Islands. Now, it took a while for tourism to show up, and it certainly didn't arrive polished, because early visitors were often fishermen, campers, and curious travelers who tolerated rough edges and unpredictable weather in exchange for solitude and scenery. That suited Bayfield just fine. Then Prohibition and the Great Depression hit Bayfield the way it hit most small towns, with less drama than cities but more lasting impact. By mid-century, Bayfield had become quieter, less industrial, and more inward-looking, a place where people stayed because they wanted to or because leaving didn't make sense, rather than because of opportunity demanded it. Roots went deep. Modern Bayfield wears its history lightly, not pretending it was always quaint and charming, but acknowledging that what survived did so by adapting, shrinking when necessary, and refusing to vanish just because the spotlight moved elsewhere. That restraint shows. Downtown Bayfield today feels lived rather than installed, with old brick buildings that have been repurposed instead of replaced, housing bookstores, small cafes, galleries, and businesses that know exactly how much traffic to expect in July and how quiet February will be. It's their seasonal reality. Summer changes everything because Lake Superior finally relaxes. The ferries run full, visitors pour in looking for island tours, sea caves, sailboats, and a version of Wisconsin that feels older and slower than the rest of the state. People walk more slowly in summer, not because they have to, because the town rewards it, offering views that insist you stop, harbors that invite your sitting, and streets that don't punish wandering. The ferry to Madeline Island becomes a rhythm of its own, carrying locals, tourists, supplies, and stories back and forth, binding Bayfield to the islands in a relationship that feels both practical and symbolic. Fall arrives quietly but decisively, bringing apple orchards to the foreground and reminding everyone that agriculture, too, found a niche here once logging faded. Apple festivals aren't nostalgia acts in Bayfield. They're an acknowledgement of survival, celebrating the fact that people figured out how to grow something reliable in a place that doesn't make farming easy or predictable. Winter strips the bay down to its essentials, emptying streets, closing businesses, and reminding residents why community matters more when isolation is guaranteed for months at a time. Living in Bayfield year-round requires a tolerance for quiet, weather, and reputation, but it also offers something increasingly rare, a sense that your own surroundings aren't trying to overwhelm you or extract constant attention. Modern life here evolves around small routines, familiar faces, and relationships with places that feel intentional rather than accidental, as people choose Bayfield knowing exactly what it isn't. There's no illusion of endless opportunity, but there's a stability of a different kind, built on predictability, mutual reliance, and an understanding that big changes arrive slowly, if at all. Now, this is a lake town, and the lake still dominates everything, shaping moods, temperatures, and conversations, because Lake Superior isn't background scenery here. It's an active participant in daily life. Bayfield endures because it learned when to push forward and when to stand still, letting the lake, the land, and time itself set the terms. Some places never learn that lesson.